Tonight on Bridge City News, a big decision came down from the Alberta Court of Appeal, which is not good news for our province's biggest union. For the second night in a row, a panel studying safe consumption sites heard from concerned residents in Lethbridge. And a Canadian woman is among the 30 who are now confirmed dead following the devastating impact of Hurricane Dorian.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. The Alberta Court of Appeal is allowing the government's Bill 9 to come back into effect after overturning an injunction granted by the Court of Queen's Bench judge that blocked it. Bill 9, otherwise known as the Public Sector Wage Arbitration Deferral Act, put a halt to wage arbitration talks for 3 collective agreements affecting about 65,000 AUPE members who work for the province or Alberta Health Services. 2 of the 3 judges ruled in favor of the UCP today. In a statement, AUPE President Guy Smith said, Bill 9 is a political decision by the UCP government to attack our constitutional rights, our wages, our working conditions, and the vital public services Albertans depend on. Finance Minister Travis Taves, meanwhile, called the decision a positive result for Alberta taxpayers. The AUP is Alberta's largest union, which has a total of 95,000 members. Lethbridge Police seized 13 firearms and a large amount of drugs from a home on Columbia Boulevard West yesterday. This follows an arrest on September 3rd of 29-year-old Adam Richard Filipcic of Lethbridge, who was wanted on outstanding warrants. Along with the firearms, police also confiscated meth and carfentanil with a street value of $3,500. They also discovered a bike chop shop with previously reported stolen bikes. Police also arrested 57-year-old Albert Henry Curtis and 24-year-old Barbara Rose Christensen. Along with Filipcic, the 2 face various weapons and drug-related charges. The investigation is still ongoing. The meeting regarding the supervised consumption services in Lethbridge continued last night. People from across the city brought more of their concerns to the provincial panel.
My wife and I don't let our children go to the parks anymore. We've found, even in our local neighborhood in West Lethbridge, we've found discarded needles. I just can't jeopardize my children's safety with the risk of discarded needles. We never had this before. I've never encountered this.
We all want the same result in the end. We want to have a safe community. We want to be able to have successful businesses. We want to be able to be safe with our children in the community. How we get there may differ a little bit. I think having this panel down and listening to the concerns is extremely important. It's been 2 days and I've been in and out of, I think it's the 11th meeting here over the couple of days here that dealing with this, and I just want to make sure that our voices are heard, and I believe they are. The panel is here to listen and take back this information to the province, and hopefully we can get the support services that we need to help our community.
If you're unable to make it to the meetings discussing the supervised consumption site, you can always fill out an online survey on the Government of Alberta website. The panel, which is traveling across the province on a fact-finding mission, will take the results back to Edmonton, which will help the UCP government decide the best approach regarding safe consumption and injection sites. The City of Lethbridge is studying a bylaw which would increase fines for public brawling. Councillors voted 7-1 in favor of allowing staff to examine how a fighting bylaw might work and target certain behaviors. The current fine for fighting is $100. Now, it's also being considered as a potential fine for bar or property owners where the fight originated. This stems from a recent incident at Boss Hogg's Bar along 1st Avenue South, where a 25-year-old man was sent to hospital following a fight outside of the bar on August the 19th. The City of Lethbridge, federal and provincial funding partners, and Red Arrow Transit celebrated the grand opening of the Lethbridge Regional Park and Ride Transit Terminal today. The city funded $4.8 million towards the $19.9 million project. By providing transit and parking services in the same location, riders will have a secure place to park before boarding regional transit services.
Not everybody in the city has a vehicle of their own, and this really helps those who rely on Lethbridge Transit. Secondly, it connects Lethbridge Transit to our private partners like Red Arrow, and make sure that people who are coming into the city from across the province can connect in one place safely, in comfort, to Lethbridge Transit and go anywhere else in the city.
We are absolutely thrilled to be a partner with the City of Lethbridge and Lethbridge Transit on this new intermodal facility. It's all about connectivity, and ease of use is how we get people out of their cars and onto public transit and onto our motor coach services. So this is just such an important step, an important partnership for Red Arrow. And it's been a few years in the making to get to this point, and we're just ecstatic with the support we've seen from the community and the city of Lethbridge.
For the passengers to have one safe, convenient location to transfer buses is a breath of fresh air compared to 4th Ave, where you're essentially out in the elements. We have had a few hiccups in terms of communicating of where the buses are. We did put up signage and whatnot on 4th Ave, but most of the customers are starting to get used to the change. When you operate the same way for almost 50 years, we've been on 4th Ave, so obviously this is a little bit of a learning curve for our patrons.
The Park and Ride has on-site security during transit operating hours, along with 24/7 security cameras throughout the facility. To celebrate the grand opening, residents are enjoying free transit for the entire day. The City of Lethbridge also celebrated the completion of the Genevieve Yates Memorial Centre renovation project today with project funders and stakeholders. In November of 2016, City Council approved advanced improvements to the Yates after receiving $3.5 million from the federal government's Canada Cultural Spaces Fund.
We now have an upgraded facility which meets modern standards. There's some beautiful touches with respect to the lighting, with the wooden feature walls, the more comfortable seats, the accessible washrooms. It's tremendous for performances. I watched the Buddy Holly story the other day, and it was a tremendous performance. People in Lethbridge can be proud of this theatre. It's been upgraded, and it's a tremendous place to watch a live performance.
The original facade is an icon of this city, and so one of the hardest things we had to do, there was a huge undertaking, but one of the hardest things was how do you put 2 elevators in the front of this building and still respect the big sweep of the original facade. So that was harrowing, and it took us a very long time, to much consternation of many people, like, come on, where are they going to go? But it took us time, but we got them in the exact right spot.
The total renovation budget was $13.96 million, with $4.21 million coming from the City of Lethbridge. The Ridgeview Lodge Seniors Home in Raymond hosted its grand opening yesterday. The project has been in the works for the past 7 years. The facility was given $10.8 million from both the federal and provincial governments. Local residents and politicians were thrilled to be part of the ribbon-cutting ceremony.
Well, Raymond is a great, close-knit community, and a lot of people want to be involved and to support something like this. And when we have a building like this that was built by the Alberta government come into our community, just what a great asset it is to our seniors. We have a growing seniors population, and now they have a place to come back to.
Well, when I first got on the board in 2010, we were talking about it, and I think that year is when we made the motion to let's do it. And it's unbelievable how long it takes for a project like this to even get off the ground. But in the last 2 years, it's really moved ahead fast.
Well, it is a great community. A lot of the seniors that live here have lived in Raymond or in the county of Warner for most, if not all, of their lives. So they are attached to the community, they have family here. So this is a great place to be, so they can be close to family, but also friends. Lots of friendships occur here, and that's the nice thing about the residents, is that they can make friends here, have a good time, enjoy their life, not worry about all the little things like cooking, cleaning, yard maintenance, and they can just have fun, which is what they deserve.
Ridgeview Lodge officials say the facility is extremely accommodating to seniors in a lower tax bracket. The recent McKinnon report on Alberta's finances say we have a spending problem and need to get that spending under control before our province's debt hits $100 billion. Tyler Dawson is the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, and he says the report also revealed that Alberta per capita spends more than any other province in Canada.
And the thing that the McKinnon report really touches on is that Alberta's sort of debt situation and spending situation per capita has outpaced other provinces. So when you look at the amount of money spent per Albertan man, woman, and child compared to British Columbia or Ontario or Quebec, we are spending quite a bit more than they are. And so that's sort of the foundational analysis that this makes.
Catch the full interview with Mr. Dawson discussing how the province is trying to get its finances in order. That's coming up in the second half of our show. Federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says it is not true that 14 former provincial NDP candidates in New Brunswick switched their allegiance to the Green Party this week. Singh says the controversy suggests an act of desperation by the Greens.
Well, I mean, this is a fiasco that the Green Party started. They put out a list of people. They spread some false information. And I think really the question has to go to them. We didn't put out the information. We didn't suggest anything. They did, and now it turns out some of the information they suggested is not true. Really, it speaks to an act of desperation maybe by Ms. May and the Green Party. We're really focused on recruiting real candidates that are in front of you right now, candidates who care about the environment.
Dozens of protesters voiced their opposition to the opening of a Chick-fil-A restaurant in Toronto. The protesters say the company has funded anti-LGBTQ initiatives, and company president Dan Cathy has voiced his opposition of same-sex marriage in the past.
On your couch, hate-free, no Chick-fil-A for me. On your couch, hate-free, no Chick-fil-A for me.
I mean, the fact that Chick-fil-A is opening up on the streets of Toronto is really problematic for us, given the fact that we know that the company promotes hate is just unacceptable. We know that in 2017 alone, the company donated $1.8 million to anti-LGBTQS organizations, including conversion therapy camps.
A Canadian woman is among the 30 people who were killed as Hurricane Dorian unleashed its fury in the Bahamas. 27-year-old Alicia Sabrina Lioli from Ontario was the latest casualty. Lioli moved to the Bahamas in 2013 to volunteer at Every Child Counts. It's a vocational school that helps children with autism. She later helped to build a new school for the organization and ran the program that helps adults with autism. Hurricane Dorian howled over North Carolina's Outer Banks today, lashing the low-lying Barrier Islands as a weakened Category 1 hurricane. Winds are now around 120 kilometers an hour. The National Weather Center says large destructive waves could reach near the ceilings of one-story structures. Strong winds are presenting challenges for crews battling a stubborn wildfire near a Southern California neighborhood. The fire that broke out Wednesday on some rural property in Riverside County grew to more than 3 square kilometers.
Yeah, it is amazing that they've got a lot of equipment here, a lot of helicopters, and they put all the equipment here just to save our homes. We appreciate that.
There's been a lot of talk recently about the dangers of vaping. Some health experts argue it can be just as dangerous as smoking cigarettes. The parents of an 18-year-old who was hospitalized due to what doctors say was a sudden and severe lung illness due to vaping are demanding more regulations on the vaping industry.
When this happened, I was driving her to college, and she said she started coughing, and she said she wasn't feeling well, and it progressed from there. It was the admitting doctor who paid a little more attention when because the question they ask is, are you a smoker? And the answer is no, you're not a smoker. And doctors aren't asking, are you a vapor? And that's scary because people are getting really sick. And she said, and thankfully he said after, are you a smoker? Even e-cigarettes. And then she said, she said yes.
We may have dodged a bullet with our daughter, but there's already been 2 victims.
Why can't we do what Michigan did? We need to demand a ban on all flavored products because that's what sucks the kids in. Nobody's going like, oh, I'll just have this that tastes like nicotine. They want the flavors, and the flavors are clearly marketed to the kids.
It was on this date that the funeral was held for Britain's Princess Diana. The world mourned for Mother Teresa, and U.S. President William McKinley was shot in Buffalo, New York. This is Today in History for September 6th.
September 6, 1901. President William McKinley is shot at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York. The gunman, Leon Czolgosz, an anarchist who was executed the following month. Vice President Teddy Roosevelt succeeds McKinley when he dies more than a week after the shooting. 1997.
Goodbye, this road from a country lost without your soul.
Britain and the world bid farewell to Princess Diana with a funeral service in London's Westminster Abbey. And in Calcutta, India, weeping masses gathered to pay homage to Mother Teresa a day after her death. 1916. Clarence Saunders opens the first self-service grocery store, the Piggly Wiggly, in Memphis, Tennessee. 1998. Akira Kurosawa, one of Japan's greatest filmmakers, dies in Tokyo at age 88. His work has influenced movies far and wide, from Hollywood westerns to Star Wars. And 1943.
Hey, teacher, believe in kids alone.
Roger Waters, co-founder and former frontman for the rock group Pink Floyd, is born in Surrey, England. Today in History, September 6th. Tim McGuire, The Associated Press.
There's some great family movies playing at the Mill this weekend, including Dora and the Lost City of Gold. With more, here's your Movie Mill Minute.
Dora and the Lost City of Gold. Having spent most of her life exploring the jungle with her parents, nothing could prepare Dora for her most dangerous adventure, high school. Always the explorer, Dora quickly finds herself leading Boots, Diego, a mysterious jungle inhabitant, and a ragtag group of teens on a live-action adventure to save her parents and solve the impossible mystery behind a lost Inca civilization.
I'll work with your parents. You're all in danger.
We're gonna die out here.
There's no need to overreact. Get it off! Get it off!
Blinded by the light. Javeed is a Pakistani teenager who experiences racial and economic turmoil while living in England in 1987. A creative soul, his musical passion in writing is set alight when he discovers the works of Bruce Springsteen, whose lyrics feel all too familiar to the aspirational teenager. Yearning to escape his rundown hometown and the rules of his traditional Pakistani household, Javeed must discover if he too is born to run.
Bruce sings about not letting the hardness of the world stop you from letting the best of you slip away. My hope is to build a bridge to my ambitions, but not a wall between my family and me.
Purpose of your visit?
I'm going to see Bruce Springsteen's hometown.
I can't think of a better reason to visit the United States than to see the home of the boss.
A slightly cooler day today with spotty showers off and on, but a nice weekend is shaping up. Complete weather details are coming up. We had some light showers off and on in some areas today. Tonight, more rain is in the forecast with a low expected near 10. Tomorrow, just a few clouds with a high near 23. Sunday, a mixture of sun and cloud and a high of 21. Monday, the clouds and showers return with the mercury dropping to 18. More rain and a high of only 14 degrees for Tuesday. Wednesday, the rain should dissipate and we should see a high of 19. Lots of sunshine at 22 is expected on Thursday. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 22 and an average low of 7. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1998 at 34 degrees, and the record low was a chilly -1 in 1948. Sunrise was at 6:54, sunset at 8:06. Looking at the national forecast for tomorrow now, Victoria will be mainly cloudy and 21. Expect an overcast sky and 22 degrees for Vancouver. Just a few clouds and 24 for Calgary on Saturday. Mostly cloudy and 25 degrees for Edmonton. Overcast and 18 for Regina. Mainly cloudy and 17 for Saskatoon tomorrow. It should be mainly cloudy and 18 in Winnipeg. Clouds mixed with sun and 23 degrees for Toronto. A good chance of rain and 20 for Ottawa. Showers and 18 is on tap for Montreal. In the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick will receive rain and 16. Halifax, Nova Scotia had a rainfall warning today and a hurricane watch thanks to Hurricane Dorian. Tomorrow, heavy rain and wind and a high of only 15. A tropical storm watch was issued for Charlottetown PEI today. Tomorrow, heavy rain with a high of 15. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, a tropical cyclone information statement was issued today. Tomorrow, mainly cloudy and a high of 16. The Canadian economy grew by just over 81,000 jobs last month. The larger than expected gain was 5 times higher than the 15,000 jobs analysts were expecting. Stats Canada says the August unemployment rate held steady at 5.7% as more people looked for work. A senior economist with TD says today's report has solid details from top to bottom. Brian DePrado says even the unchanged unemployment report had a positive tone because it came from a rising labor force. Did you know that there's a way of turning garbage into electricity? Paul Ryan is the project lead with the Southern Alberta Energy from Waste Association, and he says the big byproduct is that when this process is completed, it also produces valuable steam.
This is an electrical generation facility that instead of using natural gas or coal as a fuel to produce electricity, this uses garbage. And you can produce a tremendous amount of steam also that can be used for many different applications, for recycling, for meat processing, for vegetable processing, because everything we do when it comes to our food supply requires hot water. And you know, it's incredibly efficient to take surplus steam, a value-added product from an energy from waste facility, and then use that for processing other products.
Mr. Ryan will have more on how we can turn garbage into energy coming up after business news. A report commissioned by an industry group says Quebec has what is necessary to supply the global market with lithium-ion batteries. It does not, however, have the facilities to make them. The report says the rapid growth of the electric vehicle market represents a big opportunity for the province. Quebec's economic minister says the government aims to launch a strategy this fall to develop the lithium-ion battery industry. WestJet has scrubbed the Boeing 737 MAX jets from its schedule until at least January 5th. It is the latest airline to make the change after the jets were grounded around the world following 2 fatal crashes in 5 months. Last month, Air Canada announced its 24 MAX 8s would be grounded until at least January 8th. And Sunwing does not expect its 4 MAX jets will be back in the air until at least May of next year. Now, here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, the Alberta Court of Appeal is allowing the government's Bill 9 to come back into effect after overturning an injunction granted by a Court of Queen's Bench judge that had blocked it. Bill 9, otherwise known as the Public Sector Wage Arbitration Deferral Act, put a halt to wage arbitration talks for 3 collective agreements affecting 65,000 AUP members who work for the province or Alberta Health Services. 2 of the 3 judges ruled in favor of the province earlier today. The recent McKenna panel says Alberta's debt increased from $13 to $60 billion over the past 4 years. Up next, I chat with our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson about how the government is trying to get its financial house in order. But first, here's a look at what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. The 2019 Flex Air Parkinson's Step and Stride fundraising walk is taking place Sunday, September 8th at Henderson Lake Park. Registration is at 1 p.m. with the walk beginning at 2. This is their largest fundraising event, and money raised goes to support services, education, and research that make every day better for those living with Parkinson's disease. To register and to donate, visit parkinsonsassociation.ca/stepandstride. The Lethbridge Christian Women's Choir is beginning its fall semester Monday, September 9th at 7:30 p.m. Practices will be held at St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church. This opportunity is open to all interested women in the community. No auditions required. For more info, call Lee Van Andel at 403-317-1392. Get your dance shoes on and learn East Coast Swing. The Swing Bridge Dance Club meets Mondays at Dwell Urban Venue above Johnny Bean Coffee from 7:30 to 9:30 p.m. Come by yourself or with a partner. Beginner to expert levels are all welcome. For more details, visit swingbridge.ca. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
The McKinnon report is out, and it said that Alberta needs to get its financial house in order. Hundreds of millions of dollars need to be cut to bring Alberta back into the black by the year 2023. Joining me now from Edmonton is Tyler Dawson, who's the Alberta correspondent for the National Post and our legislative reporter. Tyler, is the province really going to war with the public sector unions?
It is certainly a possibility. The public sector unions are ready for it. As you said, the McKinnon report lists a whole bunch of ways that the province can get its finances back in order, and one of those is addressing public sector salaries, from physicians to teachers, your average bureaucrat who's working in government offices, that sort of thing. And a whole bunch of those contracts actually come due next spring. So if there's going to be a fight over those salaries, it could begin within the next year quite easily.
Now, we all kind of knew this was coming since Alberta was racking up a huge debt. The McKinnon panel said that Albertans' debt increased from 13 to 60 billion over the past 4 years and was on track to hit $100 billion.
Yeah, it's been a remarkable increase. And the thing that the McKinnon report really touches on is that Alberta's sort of debt situation and spending situation per capita has outpaced other provinces. So when you look at the amount of money spent per Albertan man, woman, and child compared to British Columbia or Ontario or Quebec, we are spending quite a bit more than they are. And so that's sort of the foundational analysis that this makes. It says, well, look, we're spending a lot of money, but it's, you know, our debt is less than Ontario's is, but per capita, we are out of whack with the rest of the country. So the idea is that if you can bring all of those numbers back down into something that sort of is more equitable to the rest of the country, we will save something to the order of $10 billion a year.
Now, in all of the spending, it's not attributed so much to the NDP the last 4 years. I mean, this has been going on for about 10 years now, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's a very long-term trend. And that was one of the interesting things about this report, that you did kind of get the sense that if they'd wanted to be super partisan and say, oh, it's all the NDP's fault, they probably could have. But this is a very, very long-term trend. And part of that is because, you know, there's lots of spending during the boom years because we rely so heavily on resource revenues. And then when, you know, the slump comes, if spending isn't adjusted down accordingly, but, you know, sort of stays the same and then goes back up again, then that's how you end up in a situation where the spending's out of control.
Did the McKinnon report also look at efficiencies with Alberta Health Services? Tyler, are we spending enough on healthcare in our province?
Well, it's a good question. It depends in many ways whether or not you believe that we are getting appropriate outcomes for our health spending. So our health spending is higher than other provinces. And, you know, if we had the best healthcare in the country, maybe that wouldn't be a big deal. But the reality is that when you compare to British Columbia, Quebec, and Ontario, which are the three provinces that the report sort of cherry picks from, shall we say, our outcomes are sort of right in the middle of the road, or even worse in some cases. A good example, well, not a good example, but a very striking example is infant mortality, where Alberta has quite poor infant mortality rates and quite high suicide rates compared to the rest of the country. So these are, you know, very poor health outcomes, and we're spending a lot of money on it.
Tyler, the federal government for the second time approved the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, but wait, still more legal challenges which may prevent shovels from going into the ground. This is exactly what Premier Kenney was afraid of.
Yeah, that's true. You know, it was practically moments after the federal government greenlighted this earlier in the summer that, you know, a whole pile of new challenges were announced, 12 of them, I believe. Now, the federal court has said that it will look at 6 of them, and it is not relitigating a lot of the previous issues. So if everyone recalls, when the Federal Court of Appeal about this time last year put a stop to this thing, they sent the government back to look at marine life and Indigenous consultations. Now, this challenge is going to have to be quite narrowly tailored to those things that the government was supposed to go back and redo. So in that sense, it's not re-looking at, you know, tons and tons of issues, but it is very narrowly tailored on these quite controversial parts of this. It is not at this moment, there's no stop work order, which is probably good news. That in theory could come later or may not, but no doubt this is going to be a long-running legal battle. And you know, after the legal battle, there's still the sort of the direct action protests and things like that construction is going to have to contend with. And
this probably is probably a contentious election issue as well for the Liberals heading into October.
Sure, yeah, the timing couldn't possibly be worse for them. You know, I think they probably had a win coming into the summer. It was a long time coming, and I'm not sure Albertans were super forgiving about it. But, you know, a couple months ago, they could have said, well, we went back and we did this again. We followed the rules. The project's going ahead and we've done what we can. So now they're sort of back in that position where they say, oh, the courts, it's back before the courts and we have to work through that. And I don't envy the Alberta Liberals who are still around, who are going to have to defend this when they're out knocking on doors.
The province's Review Committee on Supervised Consumption Services recently made its way to Medicine Hat and Lethbridge. And it's going across the province right now, Tyler. The study will look at the negative impact economically and the social impact of these safe consumption sites, but it may not be looking at any of the positives.
Yeah, so the government, when they announced this, basically said, look, the positives have been studied. You know, you have long-term studies on Insight in Vancouver, other jurisdictions have done this, so on and so forth. They said the thing that hasn't been analyzed is, you know, what's the effect on communities, on business, you know, sort of all the grievances that one hears when talking about this issue. The government is really going to be taking a close look on this. Now, they say that it hasn't been studied before. There have been a few studies. One actually, I think, is probably the exact number out of Calgary on some of the crime statistics and things like that. But you know, the criticism of this is certainly that it is a study that is going to get them where they want to be. I mean, they have been critical of, say, supervised consumption sites, I should say, and no doubt this report's going to come back with all sorts of, you know, nasty conclusions about the effects of it. How they decide to balance that with the research that suggests it saves lives is, you know, that's a political problem for the future, I think. But certainly the aggrieved neighbors and business people are going to certainly have their chance to have their voices heard on this in the coming weeks and months.
And this review panel is just basically it. It's just digging up a lot of research and taking the feedback back to the province, so they're not making any decisions with this panel here. Jason Kenney, like Doug Ford, has said that Alberta's open for business and a lot of the red tape will be eliminated. But Tyler, how is the red tape review looking?
Well, it's one of the grand ironies of this in my mind that, you know, in order to cut red tape, you strike a panel to study the matter. It's sort of like that age-old government issue of one thing leads to more and more red tape and more government. So there have been tons of submissions. Some red tape has been eliminated in sort of very small ways. But it's, you know, it's the summer and the government's been out trying to get some of these reactions and things like that. So I suspect we will see more of the concrete steps taken when the legislature returns and when, you know, when there's, you know, people paying more attention to these things. And there's a little more bang for your buck on those announcements when people are really looking closely at it.
Now, there's been an overhaul on some boards, including university boards and human rights commissions. The UCP took out the NDP appointees and put their own people in place. Is this quite common?
It is, yeah. This is sort of normal practice when a new government comes in, is that, you know, all these, you've got boards of governors that are full of people, as you mentioned, the human rights commissions, you know, there's education groups, there's a whole whack of them that I couldn't hope to name off the top of my head. And yeah, so the UCP came in and they basically fired everyone, relieved everyone of their duties, however one wants to phrase that. That part of it, I gather, is not super common. The tendency sometimes is to let those contracts sort of run out and then replace people. But there was sort of this mass firing and rehiring of some people who are very obvious UCP loyalists, some of whom had been party donors, which doesn't necessarily impugn their credentials. But, you know, it's one of those sort of age-old things in politics that everyone does, so everyone's kind of okay with it. I think one could object, perhaps, to the idea that you have partisan stacking by a conservative government, by a new Democrat government, by a liberal government, what have you, on these things. But that is certainly what they've done, and they've got a whole new roster of people in place who will be sort of managing those quasi-government affiliated boards over the next however long their terms are.
School has started once again. For some parents, it's the most wonderful time of the year. But let's discuss school curriculums. A panel which includes an American school choice advocate and a person who runs an online philosophy school will be making suggestions on what essential skills students should learn.
Yeah, it's a really interesting panel. And as you pointed out, there's a couple characters on there who just struck some reporters, certainly as they came out of left field. And I actually phoned the government and I said, how did you come up with some of these names? I've never heard of these people. And they said, well, you know, we hear things at events and names come up of people, and there were a bunch of people who weren't available for it. But yeah, so the gist of it is they're going to be looking at what the curriculum should teach. And this is again a common thing that governments do, especially conservative governments. We have seen that in Ontario. You know, there was that huge fight years ago over discovery learning in math and things like that. And so this what I would expect is going to come out with sort of a similar sort of thing and say we need to get back to the 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic, and you know, maybe learn a little bit of philosophy depending on how much influence our resident philosophy teacher has on this thing.
Yeah, and get back to basics, man. Get rid of that discovery math. I know so many parents are just, it's a nightmare for them, right? How can they help their child? I mean, it's so complex. Tyler, the government extended the curtailment of oil that can be produced and shipped to December 2020 to keep the price discounts low.
Yes, indeed. This is, we're coming up on almost a year of this being a problem now. This, as people will recall, was a big issue sort of November, December 2018, when Alberta Oil was selling at a massive, massive discount. And that was basically because there was a huge backlog of, warehouses practically full of barrels of oil and no way to get them out. Pipelines obviously being the simplest, and the next on that list being rail. So part of this whole plan to bring prices back up was to restrict the amount of oil that could come out of the ground, thereby sort of, lowering supply to bring demand up and prices. And I'm sure I botched that, and there's an economist somewhere banging his or her head against the wall, but that's the general idea. And the government has sort of looked at the price situation and said, well, this needs to continue for this period. And I do believe there is sort of a get out of jail clause where they can adjust it sort of at any time if there's sort of a big change in markets, so as to sort of benefit everyone as much as possible.
Tyler, I saw this recent tweet that kind of put a smile on my face. Natural Resources Minister Sohi was stuck in traffic as the train car was going by, but all of the oil tankers, and he's like, I can't believe this is terrible. I'm stuck again with a train. Isn't there a little irony there somewhere?
There is a little bit of irony there. It's, there's an oddly large backstory to this, and so that crossing is 50th Street that runs sort of right through Edmonton. And it is sort of an objective nightmare of a crossing. There's sort of anywhere from half an hour to 2 hours of delays every single day on that crossing. It sort of depends when you get crossed or when you get caught in it and how long the trains are stopped for at any given moment. They average about 4 minutes where they're blocking that intersection, and it goes up to about 15. And so the Liberals, one of their sort of big infrastructure announcements here in Edmonton was they're going to do a grade separation there basically to try and avoid this. But as you say, they seemed like they were probably oil tankers. And I actually put in a phone call to Canadian Pacific Railway and said, can you guys confirm whether or not there's actually oil in this? Because, it could be another chemical or something. And regrettably, they declined to throw fuel on the fire, perhaps. So, but the irony certainly did not go missed, because former Premier Brad Wall of Saskatchewan said perhaps they're shipping irony instead, and Premier Jason Kenney pointed it out. So, it's there's a little bit of, so he's right, there's a little bit of everyone else is right, but it was, just a microcosm of sort of federal versus provincial politics and transportation issues and pipeline politics, all just sort of mashed into one tweet that got a lot of attention.
Yeah. A story we recently had on BCN was how you can now have your auto insurance documents right on your phone for Alberta, and now Ontario's jumping on board as well. How practical is this?
It is a great question. If you're anything like me, your phone is on the verge of dying every time you're out and about. And I think I would have to keep a paper copy in my glove box anyways, out of the chance that my phone would be dead when I tried to pull it up. So I'm not sure it's super practical, to be honest. But, Ontario went ahead with this on Thursday, I believe, as part of their, putting drivers first stuff. It's, it's a little bit of this red tape reduction thing that makes life a little bit easier maybe for people. And I mean, I don't even own a printer these days. I have to go somewhere to get my insurance printed if I need to print a temporary slip or something. So it makes life a little bit easier for some maybe, but maybe it's only those very responsible adults that always keep their phone at 100%.
Alberta correspondent for the National Post and our legislative reporter, Tyler Dawson, joining me once again from Edmonton. Thanks so much, Tyler.
Good to be back.
Most Canadians believe in doing their part to recycle. But do we actually know what happens in that recycling process? And are there better ways to go about it? Joining me today is Paul Ryan. He is the Vice Chair and Project Lead for the Southern Alberta Energy from Waste Association, or SAWA, which is developing a project designed to turn non-recyclable garbage waste into electricity. Sounds great. Paul, thank you so much for joining us here today at Bridge City News.
Well, Paul, thank you for having me on.
You bet. Looking forward to the conversation here. I want you to, first of all, tell us a little bit about SAWA, because this has roots right here in Southern Alberta. It's not just Lethbridge, but beyond this, all kinds of small communities in Southern Alberta, right?
Well, if you look at wanting to reduce our carbon footprint in Alberta or actually even in Canada. It doesn't get any better than a homegrown, born in Alberta solution because this really is grassroots. This is like a great group of people that got together, small urbans, large rurals, all working together voluntarily to try to find a solution. And I got to tell you, it's a pleasure, a thrill to actually be a part of this.
That's awesome. So now this started in, was it Vulcan? Is that correct?
Well, I'm a little fuzzy on that particular part because that happened before I got asked to get involved. But yes, for the most part, my understanding is that it started in the Vulcan region with the Vulcan Regional Waste Commission, the town of Vulcan, the city of Lethbridge was part of that, and the town of Coaldale, and I believe possibly Willow Creek. But I mean, this really is a bunch of the local boys getting together and said, you know something, we got to stop throwing garbage into the ground and having it go into our water wells and into our groundwater. There's got to be a better way. So what is the better way?
So you are developing, as I understand it, a project that's designed to turn, again, non-recyclable garbage and waste into electricity. So could you explain how that actually works? And I understand there's a bit of a Swedish model that this has been based on as well, right?
I really can't identify any particular technology because when we get to the procurement stage, of course, that would be inappropriate for me to do. But if you look at this, what this is that this is an electrical generation facility that instead of using natural gas or coal as a fuel to produce electricity, this uses garbage. And you can produce a tremendous amount of steam also that can be used for many different applications, for recycling, for meat processing, for vegetable processing, because everything we do when it comes to our food supply requires hot water. And, it's incredibly efficient to take surplus steam, a value-added product from an energy from waste facility, and then use that for processing other products. So very much like what they did with the facility in Burnaby. They used to ship their steam to a cardboard recycling facility where they used that to create the hot water they needed for processing. So there's lots of really good value-added parts of this, but simplistically, it's burning waste instead of gas or coal to make electricity.
Right, and again, you're burning the non-recyclable waste there. Now, I understand as part of this process here, as you're analyzing things and figuring things out, you actually hired some people to analyze what's inside the dumpsters out there, right? So what did you find?
Hired some people. I think we've had something like 24 engineers now working on this project, the different parts of it. And the one you're talking about is probably one of my favorite ones when it comes to describing what we did. So if you're going to manage waste and if you want to create electricity out of it, you've got to know what's in that waste stream. What is that caloric value? So how much of it is wood? How much of it is plastic? How much of it is cardboard? How much of it is paper? How much of it is lettuce and tomatoes? And metals and all those different things. So basically, it's called a waste stream characterization, where you go out and you categorize the waste. And from that, our engineers are able to estimate what the caloric value of that waste is. In other words, how much energy is in it. Depending on who you talk to, who you read, 1 ton of municipal solid waste is the equivalent of 3/4 barrel of oil. But you got to know what's in it. And so it's basically a whole bunch of engineers in white Tyvek suits doing dumpster diving. And yes, and a lot of people laugh when you say that because they picture something. But really that's what it is. And the waste is just taken out, literally taking the bags apart and separating out the waste into the different types of things that are in that waste stream, and then weighing it and then coming up with an estimate of what does the average person produce when it comes to household waste. And when they produce that household waste, what's the caloric value of that? How much of that can be used for something else? And how much of it actually can we get into the recycling stream? Because, if you look at SAWA's mission statement, very clearly we say that we are not interested in using things that can be recycled as part of the feedstock for an energy from waste facility. We've got friends in the big cities, and Lethbridge is certainly one of them, where they work very, very hard to get as much stuff out of the landfill as they can. And a lot of times you spend a lot of money, and you probably saw the city of Calgary announcement that there are now $300,000 to store plastic that can't get recycled, and another $130,000, I think it is, to throw it in the landfill. Well, you know, that's the kind of stuff that if I was king for a day, I would say, well, can you hang on to that for me till I build my energy from waste facility? Because instead of throwing it in the landfill, why don't you send it over here and let us use it to generate some electricity and make some hot water, get some value out of it, and not burn it in the landfill. So we went out and characterized the waste stream. Certainly, we now know what's in it. We did it in a number of different places for our members, not just down in the county of Lethbridge, but we did it all over. And what we found is that it's relatively consistent with the national average. It changes during the season, summertime, wintertime are different. But certainly, it did give our engineers the information they need to then be able to look at our cost predictions. In other words, if you've got that much caloric value in your waste, you can generate this much electricity with it. And then when you generate that much electricity, we can sell that and help offset the costs of running the operation.
So this production facility, you know, once it's up and running, will it feed the grid as well?
Well, certainly, Paul, there's actually two approaches to that I've been made aware of. And so one is, yes, you can feed the grid. And so in order to do that, you need to be by a major power transmission line, which is one of the criterias on the nice to haves with where we would like to put it. But the other one has this colloquial term, it's called inside the fence. And what that means is that you have an energy from waste facility that generates a lot of electricity, generates a lot of steam. Do you need to sell it to the grid, or can you sell it locally to industries that build up around energy from waste facilities? Because they make incredibly good anchor points for heavy industrial parks or mid-industrial parks like recycling, manufacturing, paper, anything that needs electricity and heat next to those things can really benefit from it, because you don't have to build new transmission lines and new transmission wires and the carbon footprint that's all associated with that, and then fight with everybody to build it on their land to get it to your industrial park. If you can actually use that as district energy or inside the fence energy, there's an incredible monetary savings in having to supply that energy. But the other one is that it's cheap for them to buy it from you. So you think of all the greenhouses we have down in Redcliffe, down by Medicine Hat.
Right, yeah.
What are they doing there? Well, they're there because they got cheap energy. So, you know, when you go buy them little tiny 6 cucumbers in the package at the supermarket that you go to, that's where they come from. And so what SEWA did was, instead of taking that approach, we asked the question, what is the best way to treat waste other than landfilling? And man, we came across a tremendous amount of technologies, varying degrees of environmental benefit, considerable differences in operating costs. And one of the rules that we gave to our engineers is that whatever technology we pick, it's got to be able to address the whole waste stream, not just a little part of it. Because unless you address the whole waste stream, you're still landfilling. And so let's look at what we can do. And the other rule that we gave them is that it has to be demonstrated technology, commercially demonstrated. So not this stuff that the boys came up with in the garage on the workbench, and you know, not this stuff that people say should be on the Star Trek Enterprise. It's stuff that we can actually go and stand by and touch and feel and look at, and look at their emissions tests, the stuff, the regulatory responses that they had to their requirements and their operating permits, to do stack tests and do the emissions, so you can actually
let me ask
see
about that. Yeah, you mentioned, I mean, again, you're burning, you know, non-recyclables here, right, to produce steam and electricity. So what are the emissions like? Is that going to cause, you know, a big carbon footprint, or is the technology such that it really is, you know, nothing that makes a huge difference that way? It's going to be fairly non-impacting.
So now we're back to Inga from Sweden. So the technology in Europe, you know, is incredibly well understood. And, you know, they don't screw around over there because such a dense population and people are so close to these facilities that their emissions management is state of the art and continues to improve. You know, I mean, every month there's another improvement. And depending what engineering report you read or which white paper you read, you can generate electricity with waste with about the same emissions as burning natural gas to create energy. And so the rule that we gave to our engineers is we want to see the best technology out there. Yeah, it's very expensive, but it is the right thing to do. And so we looked at that as being a must-have, because if we can't do this right, we don't want to do it at all. And then you look at, so compare your emissions from an energy and waste facility to the emissions from a landfill. So now you have a landfill. Whenever I drive down the Lethbridge, I drive down over the big hill and I look to my left and you can see parts of it sticking out there. And landfills, when you put stuff in landfills, it continues to sit there and cook. It's kind of like a low pressure cooker, if you will, because everything gets mixed together. And they off-gas. So they off-gas methane. And depending on what day of the week it is and which science it is that's talking about it, it's 20 to 30 times worse than CO2. But certainly that's what they do. And you have to manage that. So you've got to collect that. And the way they normally do is they collect that and they just burn it. They don't use it to light light bulbs. In some places, they light a couple of light bulbs with it. But they convert it to CO2 away from methane because that's better for the environment. And also, there's the leachate liabilities that you have with landfills. And we've got some municipalities up north that have had some interesting engagements with Alberta Environment. And we know that we have some landfills that have excavation orders because the landfill liners are leaking into the groundwater. So it's not just what we're putting into the air, Paul. It's also what are we putting into the water?
Yeah, so when you look at the big picture, you're kind of like, say, leaking down, which isn't good, right, as with our groundwater and so forth. And then, the methane that's being given off here, and you compare that to the emissions coming from a stack that's producing electricity and steam here, it's a much better turnout here when you look at that compared to the landfills, right?
I think so, yes. And in terms of emissions, people always say to me, and this is one of the reasons I was asked to get involved with the Say Well project in the first place. I understand stack emissions from what we call regulated emitters. So anything that's got a smokestack is a regulated emitter. And so they have to go through approval processes and things. And then they have mandatory reporting.
Hey, let me shift gears for a second here. I had mentioned at the top there a little bit about the recycling, and maybe we don't know what that process actually looks like. But where does recycling end up once you see the truck picks it up? Bye, it's gone, right? We have no idea where it goes after that, most of us, I think. So, I hear some stories that, some of it gets dumped in a landfill and doesn't actually get recycled. And especially now that, of course, China is not taking our garbage like they used to. That's probably true, isn't it?
Well, I get to speak to a lot of municipal councils, as you could imagine. We've got something like 50 hamlets, towns, and villages and rural municipalities involved in this, and they all got their own councils. So I think some days I should get a top hat and a cane because of the roadshow that you have to constantly educate new councils and new politicians. And I asked them directly, I said, so where does your garbage go? And you got to see the look on their face because they go, well, we put it in the bin. I said, okay. And then where does it go from there? Well, they pick it up. I said, okay. And from there, where does it go? Well, it's politicians for the most part don't care about garbage until it's piling up and stinking in front of their neighbor's house. And so most people don't know where it goes. It just goes, it goes away. So, and you're recycling and where does your recycling go? Well, I put it in the blue bin. All right. And where does it go from there? Well, they pick it up and, and then the municipality takes it. And so then you go to the municipality and say, all right, so what are you guys doing with this? They say, well, we have a qualified contractor that takes it and they've got a market for it. And so now try to make the circle smaller and good luck with that one. And for that to be occurring, you've got to believe, and you need to be a true believer in this one, you got to believe that when China shut the door with the golden sword last year, 80% of the world's recyclables were going to China. And they stopped. They slammed the door shut. So now you've got to believe that someone managed to take up 80% of the world's capacity of recyclables within 1 year.
That's not happening.
Who is that genius?
Hey, can you give us a brief, how long will this take to get going? Are you guys close to have this up and running at all? I know there's approval and you've got to find a proper location and it's a whole process, right?
It is, Paul, and every morning when I'm shaving and looking in the mirror, I look at myself and I say, why does this take so long? And it is a long process, concept to completion, the one in the Durham-York region. It was 10 years from concept to completion. We're a little bit more than halfway through. We had a change in government a little while ago, so that certainly affected our timeline. But right now, we're in the middle of shortlisting. So we had 6 municipalities that say, hey, listen, we want to have this thing because it's an economic engine. I mean, you're in Lethbridge, look around at your industrial parks and look what that does in your economy. And they're saying, we want these. These are economic drivers. So we're evaluating those right now. We're getting pretty close to the short list. And then once we do that, then we are ready to go and now go out to the technology vendor marketplace and the finance marketplace and say, okay, we got a place to put it. We've got all these municipalities. We got this much waste. And now what are we doing next? And so we're poised to do that. But we, in order to shortlist some of these sites, we got to go dig holes in fields. Well, there's crops out in fields right now. And I don't have to tell you in Lethbridge, how would you feel about me running my tracked hoe out in your cornfield and digging a hole? So we're waiting until harvest is, until the crops are off. And then we're going to do that. And we hope to go to our membership in October with the recommendation to see what they say. Because while I might be the project lead and I'm the one that you talk to, all of the decisions are made by our members because this is a big play. It's a big deal.
Thanks for sharing all of that with us here today. We needed to hear that. Paul, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Paul, for having me on.
On behalf of all of us at Bridge City News, thank you so much for watching.